Here we go.
Hi, this
Hey,
is Patrick McCray, and I am joined by,
Alan Gallant.
and we are here to. Wait a minute, hold on. What's that smell? It's coming from the south. It smells like
It's
something's overcooked. What
it's
is it?
it's Mississippi burning.
Oh my God! We'll put it out
Uh, uh,
of the country, perhaps at that time.
I've got
Uh
some spray. Uh,
we now, wait, Alan. We are being far too lighthearted about this movie, considering what went on in the film. I just that just even I have decided to have some decorum randomly. It will pass.
um,
Uh, Alan, what's this movie about?
it is about the 1964, summer of 1964, June of 1964, an investigation into the deaths of three Freedom Riders. Who, for those of you who don't know who Freedom Riders were, they were young students that were sent down, usually from the north to the south, to register African Americans to vote during the era of a rather violent era of Jim Crow in the 1960s. From the mid 50s to the 1960s, there were freedom rides, there were marches. Martin Luther King, of course, would be one of the major forces behind a lot of that civil rights. Ralph Abernathy, the Bloody Sunday in Selma, Alabama, when they tried to march on the Pettus Bridge and got basically beaten for it the first time they tried it. It got so bad that the National Guard was sent out to many of these events to protect the protesters and marchers. But there was nobody there when Cheney, Goodman, and Schwerner were brutally murdered by the Ku Klux Klan in Philadelphia, Mississippi. And this movie stars Gene Hackman and Willem Dafoe as two FBI agents that are sent down there initially to investigate this, and the resistance, of course, that they receive. At the time, there's such a cultural, existential battle of wills going on between certain elements of the South, not everybody in the South, but an influential element of the South that included governors and sheriffs and
Unbelievable.
a great deal.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, yeah. Basically, the government was essentially controlled by segregationists. And for those of you who are too young to remember that, segregation basically was the Jim Crow series. There was a series of laws in place for it, including you couldn't intermarry racially, you couldn't use the same bathrooms or water fountains or hotels as a white person if you were a person of color. African American specifically. This is, of course, a leftover historically from the Civil War and Reconstruction era, and also the post antebellum South. An enormous amount of passed down resentments and all sorts of things going on that are working against the African American population. And at this point in time, the time of Mississippi burning in the summer of 1964, violent methodologies were being used with impunity by particularly members of the Ku Klux Klan in Philadelphia, who were also members of law enforcement, many of them, or were associated with those members of law enforcement. So it is an incredibly serious topic. This movie is more or less it's more from the point of view. We get a lot more from the point of view of these northern whites coming down, trying to investigate these murders, which include a murder of a white, a Jewish man.
They just don't quit.
Yeah, no, not at all. And the typical way that it was done back then is that they would arrest you, they would take you in, intimidate you, and then they would release you, and their buddies from the Klan would be waiting for them, and they would take them on their final ride, and beat them, terrorize them, at the very least, and sometimes kill them. And so this was what the FBI federal officials were up against coming into Philadelphia, Mississippi. At this particular time, also, if it was a local crime, including things like murder, it was going to be tried locally, and therefore no white man was ever going to be convicted under these Jim Crow laws in the Deep South at the time for killing a black man or woman or child, such as in the case of Emmett Till, a Chicago child that came down to the Deep South and ended up being killed for allegedly whistling at a white woman, which turned out to be a lie. Many, many years later, we discovered that through the woman that accused him of it. May she rest in hell. Anyway, Cheney, Goodman, and Schwerner went down there and got in a bad situation and ended up being killed. And the bodies were secreted away somewhere, and they didn't even have the bodies. So that was part of the investigation that was going on in this movie. And of course, they were met with resistance the entire way, hostility the entire way. But in this movie, you're getting that idea. This is really mostly, I mean, it's not entirely from the point of view of the whites that are coming down here, but that the main characters are white federal officials, FBI agents, or white supremacists on the other side of it. The African Americans who are depicted in this film are obviously not secondary characters, but it's also not the thrust of this particular movie as it is in, say, a movie like Ghosts of Mississippi, where the African American experience is more concentrated and it's told from the point of view of them more than this movie is. But this movie certainly has the African American point of view, no doubt. The performances in this movie are incredible for me. You've got the up and coming genius of Willem Dafoe, and then you've got the established genius of Gene Hackman, and they're playing partners, so-called partners. But within this partnership, you see the conflict between the North and the South. Gene Hackman's playing an agent who was a sheriff in Mississippi before he became a federal agent. And so his point of view is, even though he is adamantly against the racist policies of the South, he understands them existentially and experientially. Tells a story about his father. When they're sitting in a hotel room at one point, Defoe is voicing his frustration about the fact that they're just coming up against a brick wall from the Southern sheriff and his cohorts. Among whom Brad Dourif plays a fantastic, fantastic.
One of the best villain actors.
He's a really smarmy, real, cowardly but dangerous villain in this movie, and he plays the husband. He's a deputy sheriff, and he plays the husband of. Now it's flopped right
Frances McDormand.
Frances McDormand's character, and this is one of the early Frances McDormand films. She does Blood Simple a couple years later, I think. Does she not?
No, she did that in '84.
She did it in '84, so she'd already done it. Okay, great. So I got that mixed up. So this is still in her coming out phase in terms of being an established A-list character actress, which she is and always has been. And she does a brilliant job. She's conflicted too. She's not a racist, and she's married to one. Yeah. She's surrounded by institutional racism, and she grew up with it. She has this wonderful speech about how she grows up with it. By the time she's 7, she's buying into it, and she marries into it. And when she gives the speech with such world-weary regrets. It's a wonderful speech. The actors that play various clans members are brilliant. They're Brad Dourif, of course, I mentioned
Mhm.
before, is really brilliant. Lee Ermey, who was not really an actor, but could play a certain type of role with aplomb, and did so,
Mhm.
is great as the mayor, who's he's not the instigator of this, but he's part of what upholds the institutional racism and the violence. Um, Gellard Sartain, who came to fame on Hee Haw, among other things, plays the sheriff, and is Ray Stuckey, which is based on a real life guy by the name of Lawrence Rainey, who was one of the people that were, arraigned and so on. And what they ended up having to do is get them on federal charges, and so they got them for civil rights violations. No, you couldn't get him for murder. That was a local charge back then.
Yeah.
And so,
Unbelievable.
yep, they got him for civil rights. Michael Rooker is fantastic
Oh,
in
wow.
this. And he plays a guy named Frank Bailey, which is based on a real life guy named Alton Wayne Roberts, who was one of the real low lifes in the Klan, who was one of the arms of violence, firebombing, lynchings, you name it. This guy did it. He was into it. And for those of you who might not know, or you may know Michael Rooker in blue makeup, playing an alien father figure in
The Guardians of the
Guardians of the
Galaxy movie.
Galaxy.
Yeah.
And this was him early in his career as well. But the movie's great, and it's historically accurate and inaccurate at the same time. We don't know exactly how they got some of these guys to break, but we do know that they got them to break. And so this movie explores that. And basically what happens is Gene Hackman's a character, FBI agent Rupert Anderson, um, is told by Willem Dafoe at one point in utter frustration, okay, we'll do it your way. And what the implication is it's going to take a guy from the South to break the South here, to break this.
It's wonderful seeing the South confront itself like that in
Yeah,
the film.
and I mean, he's confronting his own past too. He tells the story about his dad anyway in this hotel room that I kind of went around. Now I'm coming back to. He tells Defoe's character Alan Ward that he just tells a story about my daddy, and one of those kind of stories. And basically, the story is about how his father. There was this a black man who bought a mule, sharecropper in town, and everybody was talking about this guy and his mule and how he was going to maybe buy some more land and he was going to be successful because he had scraped together enough cash to buy this mule. And then one day the mule shows up dead. And then one day, this is when Rupert's a kid and he's riding around with his dad, and they see that the sharecropper shack's empty. He's gone. The guy is gone. He's just left town. And he turns and he looks at his dad and he realizes that his dad did it. And then his dad realizes that the kid realizes that he did it. And he said he saw shame on his face. But at the same time, his father's reasoning for doing this was, if you can't be better than an N-word, what can you be better than? And Defoe says, "What's this? What are you saying?" I said, "No, it's just a story about my dad." And then he just considers it, and then he says, "You're so full of hate, he didn't realize that being poor was killing him."
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So this movie, I mean, obviously, this movie has a story to tell and a point of view to tell it from, and a moral compass, which I find
a strong one.
Yeah, it's a very strong one. As a kid, I saw some of this stuff unfold on television, not having no idea as to
Do you remember what the events were? Or just that there were
Well, I
events?
remember the Pettus Bridge. I remember seeing the film footage of the marches where they were using fire hoses. I think that was Birmingham.
Yeah.
Bull Connor was the guy's name, the sheriff of Birmingham. I have vague memories of those things. Not obviously not fully formed memories as a 4 and a 5, 6-year-old in that general vicinity, but I do remember that.
If you want some really good historical images and reflections on that, go to benmartinphotojournalist.com. Ben was he was Kathleen Lee Scott's husband,
Yes.
but in addition to that, he was the first photojournalism editor for Time magazine, and so he would be sent on assignment all over the place to cover these things, and he covered that.
Yes.
And the pictures are amazing.
Mm-hmm.
There are no really violent pictures. He didn't do that, but he got
No.
the march.
He got up close
The bridge.
pictures. Yeah, he got some good stuff. I think at one point King thought that having white photographers and reporters around him was a big help, that people wouldn't shoot at him. That there was less of a chance that was going to happen at that time, because I mean, his assassination was a very real possibility from the late 50s on. He knew it. Anytime he stepped outside, to give any kind of a public demonstration or speech, that was going to happen. But yeah, I've seen some of those pictures. They're outstanding. I highly recommend that website, Ben Martin Photojournalist.com. So
yeah.
Yeah.
So what about this movie? Because we're both fans of Alan Parker.
Mm-hmm.
Alan Parker gave us Pink Floyd The Wall.
Yes.
He gave us the Devil movie with Mickey Rourke. What was that? And Lisa Bonet.
Oh my God. Now I'm missing it.
Angel Heart.
Angel Heart. Okay.
He gave us Angel Heart. Yeah. And of course he gave us Road to Wellville.
Yeah.
So what in this movie is Parkerian, would you say? The faces, certainly.
Yeah. I think the grit and grain of the film is Parkerian in some ways, although he moved from beautiful vistas to grit fairly easily in several of his movies, including Bugsy
both,
all things.
This movie has both, definitely.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I look, if I'm looking at like Wellville and I'm looking at Mississippi Burning, I'm looking at the initial scenes. They're in the South, and just the whole milieu of the detail of the dusty little town and people walking on the streets and things like that. And then at the end of the vista shot of the congregation at the burnt down church trying to have a meeting, that kind of stuff, that gives, I think that's the kind of stuff, the touch of the soul of him.
Yeah.
For me anyway. And I know there's many other examples of what he does, but he does that really well.
Yes, he does.
The night scenes are extremely challenging in this film for any cinematographer to do these and make them, let's getting the shot with all this flame and darkness, and
it feels like he wants to outdo Orson Welles.
Yeah.
On Touch of Evil, several places.
Yes, absolutely. And that's hard. That's really tough technical work for cinematographer and the tech group, because you got to get the lighting just perfect in that. Otherwise it's going to look like, oh, look at that, he's got a 50K on him in the middle of it. So that's really challenging work, and I thought they did a magnificent job of that. When they needed to get somebody in the shot, it was there. When they needed to be shadows or silhouettes, that's the way they got it. I'm sure all of that was challenging, very, very challenging.
I wonder where they shot this, if they actually shot it in Mississippi or just near it. In New Orleans, Louisiana have all the tax incentives.
Yeah. Let me see if I've got anything here. Um, Now, this movie was actually criticized for fictionalizing certain events by people that were there. However, it's a film, and to tell a story in 2 hours, I just saw a film that the same critique has been made for different reasons, obviously, but
What
in
was the movie?
A Complete Unknown. It's the Bob Dylan story from the
Oh
time he
yeah.
arrives in New York until there's several elements where they took liberties in order to tell the story. And people have mentioned that, but also it is a film, and you have to give a film its due in terms of that type of storytelling.
Mhm.
Uh, Generally, this movie had positive reviews. Um,
Oh yeah, I remember it being very well
yeah,
responded to.
yeah, and it probably ended up tripling its investment. It certainly more than doubled it on its initial movie house run.
What do
But
you think? 'Cause you're looking at this, and then we're looking at Hoosiers, which were
yeah,
around the same time. I think they were within a year of each other,
yeah.
maybe. Okay,
Yeah, well, 86 to 88. 88 was this one was 88.
so reel us back a little bit. Let's look at Gene Hackman's career. What
Hmm.
was it? What did he do? What do you think was the tipping point film that got him these parts?
It's the 80s. Yeah. Well, it's really hard to nail down because I mean this affect, this toughness that he has, this the toughness part he's had the whole time, but
He's
the
always had.
vulnerability
Yeah, go back to
part.
the conversation.
Yeah, the vulnerability part is the thing, I mean, Hoosiers does beget Mississippi Burning in that respect.
Hmm.
He's tough, but he's fair, and he has a heart for the people around him in Hoosiers, and he does in this movie too. He's
Yeah.
he's just pissed off and frustrated because it's the pressure it's a different kind of pressure, and as a brilliant actor that he is, he approaches that pressure a little different. They get into a fight and a scuffle about the whole thing, and it turns out that he orchestrates this scuffle to try to let this guy blow off steam, and maybe they can have a conversation about how to do things the right way, the way he sees things.
Yeah.
Um, so that's definitely part of it. It's hard to say one film. I mean, there's a
Well,
progression.
I was just wondering, sort of looking at his IMDb, what
Yeah,
he had been doing in the early '80s that made enough producers say, okay, yeah, we can make this movie. We got Hackman now.
yeah. Well, I mean, even before that, he'd already won an Academy Award and been up,
Yeah.
for numerous awards for playing Papa Doyle.
Mhm.
First of all, so that's where you get the tough stuff right there. And Popeye Doyle is a thoughtful character. I don't know how. I mean, I'm sure he was a thoughtful man too, the real Popeye Doyle. But
Yeah.
that's all part and parcel to who Gene Hackman is, and the guy that I don't think he's ever shot a dishonest scene in his entire life. As an actor, he knew how to approach it with the utmost honesty,
Well,
the truthfulness, as they
that's
say.
what makes something like Royal Tenenbaums even funnier
Yes,
because he's this consummate con man.
he is. He's totally, but he's having such a good time.
Having a great time, and
Yeah.
he's sincere in his con. Somehow within his con, there manages to be this core of strange sincerity. It's the ultimate magic if
Hmm. Yeah,
that he's
because when
openly playing the whole
yeah,
time.
because he's when he's with the kids, it's like in a lot of ways he will torture them, and then other times let's go and play in the street. And,
Yeah.
it's, yeah, it's marvelously layered.
Mm.
This character isn't as layered as that, but it's pretty layered. um, the whole idea that makes this film work, I think, is the idea of the guy from Mississippi and the guy from up north trying to come to some conclusion about what's happening, and the altruism versus the reality what's going on in this little town and why it's happening, because the William Dafoe's character doesn't really understand that, at least not at first. He begins to understand it when he acquiesces to some of the methodologies, when they start bringing in these shady agents that nobody knows who they work for. They're just working for Gene Hackman at this point.
Mhm.
You know, are they FBI guys? Are they, or are they just like black bag guys that he's bringing
Well,
in?
yeah, they're bringing in
No.
a lot of weird stuff.
Yeah. And but he understood that fighting fire with fire, literally, is
Mhm.
Mississippi burning. You fight the fire with fire. Um, and they get the one guy to crack because they set him up to look like the Klan. They're telling him that the Klan's out to get him because they think he's told them things. It's the old detective play, and when they're interviewing a suspect and they say your friends gave you up, that kind of
Oh
thing.
yeah, 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 yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So and Lester is the character. He's the goofy young guy who's in the middle of all this nonsense. And sure enough, they dress up a bunch of their black bag guys and black ops and
Oh,
as
yeah.
Klansmen, and throw stuff through his window and chase him into the swamp, and then of course he's miraculously rescued uh, after he craps himself, and they get him to give it up at that point. He's afraid for his life. It's an interesting, because it has elements of a procedural that way, an FBI procedural, and I really like this film. It doesn't, for me, it's okay if it's not absolutely historically accurate. I think Mississippi.
To play, it doesn't claim to be historically
No, it
accurate.
doesn't. And the Ghosts of Mississippi is closer to being historically accurate because they talk about all, that's the Byron de la Beckwith trial. That's what it's all around, because he was the one that murdered Medgar Evers.
Okay.
And Whoopi Goldberg gives a fantastic performance in that movie as well. She's great. And I hate to say it because I don't necessarily agree with everything he says, but James Woods is fantastic as Byron de la Beckwith in that movie as well.
Um,
It's probably one of his best performances ever. One of.
what if let's say you're a high school kid and somebody puts this movie on,
Mm-hmm.
what are things you should look at? You're going to be bored because it's not happening now, et cetera, et cetera. At least at the
Right.
beginning, you think you're going to be bored. I don't understand how someone could be bored,
Right.
just 15, 20 minutes in.
Sure.
It's my God, what other apocalyptic thing's going to happen next?
Right. Right.
But nevertheless, what would you ask them to look at or look for so they have something to do uh, as this is unfolding
I'd
to
ask
keep
them to
them?
think. I'd ask them to think about the morality of two things, and I'd ask them to look at the established morality of segregation.
Mhm.
And there is a morality. It may be an moral
Sure,
immorality
no,
to
there's
us
there's an
now, but
ethos.
and look at it from their point of view, and look at it from the point of view of the people that look at it from the point of view of the African Americans that are under this regime. Look at it
Mhm.
from the point of view of the federal government and the people and the in particular the protesters. Why this is happening? Why this clash is happening? What are the moral stakes? What are the physical stakes? Look at all of this stuff. You've never, we don't live in an era yet where we have these such high physical stakes that these people experienced, and the reasoning behind it, even though it may be completely alien to us now. What was the reasoning behind this response?
Mhm.
To it. What kind of identity crisis were the people of Philadelphia, Mississippi going through at this point in time because of everything that's happening in the outside world? And they're very well aware of it. It's made reference to many, many times. It's like, oh, go home, leave us alone, leave us alone. they're not going to be left alone, because
It's like you
leaving
being
these
left alone
people
is
alone,
fine.
you
The
know.
person you're not leaving alone is who we're concerned with.
That's correct. And so there is a spider web of all of this action, reaction, morality stuff going on, identity, and of course, one of the things I would teach them about too is the lost cause mythology, because it was being taught in schools at this time. For those of you who don't know, the Department of Education was basically ruled over by a group of old South preservationists, I guess we could call them in one respect, called the Daughters of the Confederacy. And the Daughters of the Confederacy actually held approval to history textbooks in the South for probably 75 years, I guess, maybe close to 100 years, but 75 at least, up until the 60s and early 70s. So that resonates. And what the lost cause mythology is that the war between the states, or the war of northern aggression, as
War of northern aggression,
was basically, and all due respect to Southerners for this, because this was the milieu that they've been taught for many, 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 many years, is that the war was not about slavery. Okay, take that in for a second. The war was indeed about states' rights. And the reasoning behind this was to sanitize the idea of slavery as an institution, an aberrant institution. They must have agreed that it was being viewed that way by that time, because that's why they changed it. That's why the social change was made, and the historical change was made in the books, to say that, well, slavery was of benefit to, and we're seeing a little bit of that today, unfortunately, in southern states. I live in a southern state,
I do
so.
too.
And we're seeing a bit of that coming back, unfortunately, governmentally. We're being asked to tolerate our kids being told things like, "Well, slavery wasn't all bad," and that comes from that comes from the mythos of the lost cause, that the lost cause was states' rights, and yeah, well, it was this, the argument can be easily made: states' rights to enslave people.
Yeah.
It was actually an incredibly vital part of their financial agricultural system to have enslaved people, rather than having to pay people real money, aside from buying them.
Yeah.
To labor.
I have a cure for all of this. When the causes of the Civil War are brought up, and kids start to go into these long explanations, a lot of them sort of hew to that lost cause philosophy.
Sure.
And I say, well, I can tell you what the Civil War was about. In the North, we just got tired of all the racists down in the South, so we went down and shot them.
now
and I stare at them.
Right.
Yeah, prove me wrong.
Yeah, really. Think about that. Yeah, examine that. And now let's find some common ground here, instead of the ridiculous on both sides.
Yeah.
And that's some of the problem today with political discourse as well. We're ridiculous on both sides instead of finding the common ground.
And I would say, along with that, the belief that each side does have something legit.
Oh, well, yes, that's not
a horrible
case,
thing.
is it?
And a friend of mine, Parker Cooper, when I was talking about someone I was dealing with who liked to use the phrase, "We'll just have to agree to disagree," and I found that to be a very cowardly stance. I'm not necessarily fond of that. He did not like it either, and he said, his philosophy teacher, and he said, one thing that I'll sometimes say in those situations, if someone says we'll just have to agree to disagree, is he'll respond, I don't even know if I agree to that.
Yeah.
And leaves it there. And as important as accord is diplomatically, There are also times when you're just dealing with a lot of nonsense,
Yes, and you
and it
have to understand what that is. It gets really foggy when you start talking about, well, I have a right to my opinion. Yes, you do. It may be an ill-suited opinion to the facts, but you have a right to it. But I have a right to say it's an ill-suited opinion to the facts.
yeah,
You
yeah,
know?
it's a good opportunity to talk about confirmation bias.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, so it's always the whole South from long before the Civil War to now is an endless opportunity to look at a gem with a lot of facets.
Mm-hmm. Hmm.
That's the one thing I think everyone can agree on is that
Yes.
it's
Well,
never quite, despite my Civil War description, nothing in the South is as simple as
no,
it seems or should be,
it is
and
not.
nothing can be accepted completely nor rejected completely.
Right. You can't just reject things out of hand that are part of the cultural fabric. You have to deal with them. And that's, I think Gene Hackman's character really kind of summarizes that very well in some of the things that he does and says in this movie, that it's not just a simple moral imperative of slavery is wrong, Jim Crow is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. When you come down into a society that's been inured with the lost cause and the whole idea that the races are not equal and various other things, it's they're not going to respond to that, you
No,
know. Not in the way you would like them to.
no.
Oh yes, I understand. I see the light. Yes, that's not what's going to happen practically.
No.
For me, the lost cause thing, I lay blame on the people that were participating in the rebellion, because they're the ones who decided to write the books that said, well, God bless General Lee, and please understand that this is about states' rights and that we weren't a bunch of slave masters first and foremost. Yes, you
No, because
were.
you couldn't afford to be.
You know, but that's where I lay the blame. I don't lay the blame on succeeding generations that were basically indoctrinated into that, who were told that all of that was true when they were 6 years old, and so on, and beyond. Um, that responsibility initially, at least, lies with those people, the generals and the politicians and the slave owning aristocracy that wanted to
It's
preserve that status quo in some way. Nobility.
it's odd. The romance of that is so crucial to so many people.
Yes, it
And
is.
there's a gentleman in town very well placed in theater in Knoxville, and every year he hosts Robert E. Lee's birthday as a
Hmm.
party. And this is a guy who's a yellow dog Democrat,
Yeah.
but finds no irony in it. He's very serious about it. And you're not going to get ahead directing Shakespeare in Knoxville if you do things like call General Lee a hideous war criminal.
Right.
But he was,
Yes.
and
Well.
I stick with that.
Yeah.
He's one of the great villains of history, and I'm very proud of a guy like Ulysses S. Grant, who's a hero of mine.
Hmm.
And boy, did he treat the South well after the war,
Hmm.
immediately after the war, and the Southern soldiers he treated very well, and the people he had no tolerance for, and we're just going all over the map here,
Yeah. Well, I
were
mean, this
with
movie opens you up to that. So
yeah,
because
yeah,
of
it
its
does, it
roots,
does.
historical roots.
Yeah, he ordered his soldiers. The people he was telling were his own soldiers, his own men, and he said, "Listen, you're going to be just nice as you can be to these guys because the war is over. They're Americans again, and you need to treat them as such because they're going through hell,
Yeah.
you know." And
Which is
I
which
would
is
like to think that a lot of them would have gone through a hell of their own conscious had the South won.
right.
That at some point they would just have to sit back and think about all the death to preserve the right to create more death.
Hmm.
Bizarre. and and
Yes.
and to think that because this is what gets me about now is I think about the South, and these people coming from the Enlightenment and what America was, and America as an idea
Yep.
where humans owned the government, individuals owned the government, and it existed to protect their rights to the Civil War. Just like you look at Weimar Germany to Nazi Germany.
Right.
And, Obama's America to
Yada.
Yeah. Lots of things. I think this movie is probably more crucial than ever now to see. And that's one of the things that made it very disturbing for me this time around. I had seen it, years ago, 90s.
Yeah, you probably
90s.
had a little bit more historical background in terms of being able to look at it in an end result kind of way. Maybe.
Yes, but now I was just looking at it in terms of, George Floyd and the reactions to that now.
More recent. More recent.
Yeah, the dismantling of DEI and oh boy.
Yeah.
Here's an interesting question. Are you going to see Snow White?
No, I hadn't had any plans to. I'm not a big Snow White fan anyway.
I'm not either, but it is so controversial.
It's about appearance, apparently. It's about these women's relative appearance. What happened to the spiritual content of these individuals? Which is, I mean, you consider. Yes, you can consider. What? No, that's not the part that a lot of people are crapping about. Believe it or not, they're most facially crapping about the fact that Snow White isn't as pretty as the.
Well, that's just bigotry. That's just I think bigotry.
Yeah.
I think she's pretty cute.
Yeah.
That's just me.
I mean, this is what they're doing. They're boiling. Some people are boiling it down to standard of beauty, and it's like, go away.
I'm that's a baffler. That's a baffler to me.
Yeah, I mean, what you're talking about is definitely more of a moral issue than the standard of beauty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm definitely going to see it.
Yeah.
Partially because I don't like a movie being bullied this badly in pre-release.
I understand.
Whether or not I agree with all the politics.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I'd like to participate in that just a little bit.
Sure.
And before it vanishes into history, because it has become such a flashpoint political discussion, to at least be able to say, hey, I saw it.
Yeah.
Because I don't think Disney's going to keep this in theaters very long.
Probably not.
Yeah.
Probably not.
Well, and so there, Gene Hackman.
So there, Hackman. Standard of beauty.
Can we talk about Royal Tenenbaums? So,
what's that?
Can we talk about Royal Tenenbaums? So that's my movie. That's what I want to watch.
Yeah.
I love that. I love these others, but I'm so fond of that.
Yeah.
When would be good?
Maybe in a couple days. I've got an opening coming up here. Maybe later in the weekend, like fine. Saturday or Sunday.
Try. What about Saturday night?
Saturday night's good.
Okay, that sounds good to me.
Yeah, I'm willing to spend some money on that one to watch it.
Good movie.
So I haven't seen it in a while either. So.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that after I figure out how this machine can stop. And in the meantime, I am Patrick McCray.
And I am Alan Gallant. And thank you very much for your patience and perseverance.
Jewel T. Scenes presents Good Night.